The president has arrived in South Korea today for the second leg of his Asia tour, where security and the recent ferry tragedy dominated the day's events. This morning, the president said the U.S. stands shoulder to shoulder with South Korea in the face of North Korean provocations. Now, that reassurance amid warnings North Korea's young leader Kim Jong-un could order another nuclear test to coincide with the president's visit as a show of strength. President Obama also led a moment of silence for the victims of the tragic ferry accident and offered items of remembrance, a flag that flew over the White House on the day of the disaster, and renewal, a magnolia tree from the White House lawn. But developments elsewhere in the world, like the collapse of the Mideast peace talks in Ukraine, continue to overshadow the president's trip. At a news conference this morning, Obama offered this new warning to Russia.
We'll continue to keep some arrows in our quiver in the event that we see a further deterioration of the situation over the next several days or weeks.
But despite all the turmoil overseas, there seems to be some welcome news for the president waiting back home when it comes to the midterms and his health care law. More on that in a moment. But joining us now is the managing editor for thinkprogress.org, Igor Volsky. It's great to have you at the table. We've talked a lot about how the crisis in Ukraine has sort of overshadowed most of this trip, a trip that the president, I think, hoped would strengthen security and economic ties abroad. And as he arrives in North Korea, he's now faced with that sad, ferry accident, as well as this threat now from North Korea. How distracting is all of this in terms of actually getting something done?
Well, they've been trying to pivot to Asia for years.
Yeah.
For 3 years now, he tried to focus on Asia, and he's had to cancel multiple trips. Now he's there, and yes, as you say, all these events overshadow it. I think, though, ultimately his message of that America has the back of South Korea if North Korea becomes aggressive, that it views China as hostile in certain situations, particularly those disputed islands when it comes to Japan. I mean, that carries some currency. But certainly it's difficult to pivot to Asia.
There's only so much
when
you
the
can
world
do.
is kind of happening all around him.
Right. Yeah, one of the president's big goals for this trip has been negotiations over the Trans-Pacific Partnership, this trade deal between the U.S. and a variety of Asian countries. And there was a comment from the Japanese finance minister that he doesn't think that there's going to be motion on it until after the midterm elections. Is this one of the rare issues where President Obama might actually get more cooperation if Congress shifts toward Republicans in November?
I mean, it seems to be that way, but I wouldn't discount the opposition from Republicans on this issue. Yes, it's a big business priority, and business Republicans are behind it. But you look at the Tea Party faction. I mean, they wrote a letter, some 30 House Republicans, saying, hey, look, this is a congressional issue. We don't want to give authority to the president on this. And they don't like some of those union provisions that Democrats are trying to put in. So I think ultimately it's hard to see how he gets this done, either before midterms or after midterms.
In the next segment, we're going to talk more about John Boehner and him crying about immigration. But the same sort of sentiment exists for Democrats around Obamacare, where those who are running in red states are the ones who are saying, oh, it's too hard, don't make me do it. 8 million people have signed up. Igor, isn't it time, even for the red state Dems, to stand up and say, I stand with Obamacare?
Well, they're trying to. They look at the numbers, and that's good news for them. I think ultimately, the more Democrats run away from the law, the less popular it becomes. Yeah. So you voted for it, you're going to have to live with it. And so they're embracing this message of the law's okay, there are some loopholes, there's some problems we might want to fix, let's focus on that. And that polls well for them, and I think ultimately it kind of helps push the into, this thing's not going away anytime soon.
Right.
Well, and one area where red state Dems have been more comfortable is with the issue of Medicaid expansion, which is popular, especially a lot of the southern states where these red state Democrats are running. The population would disproportionately benefit from expanding Medicaid through the Affordable Care Act. I was taking a look at Louisiana, where Mary Landrieu, of course, is in a pretty tough battle there, and she's been calling the lack of the Medicaid expansion the Bobby Jindal gap. Right. And I was looking at some of the numbers there. I mean, to me, this is insane. Louisiana could save potentially $134 million next year if they go forward with the expansion. They are literally spending money, $100 million, to deny 242,000 Louisianans health insurance. this can't be sustainable for the long term. I mean, certainly, eventually, these states are going to have to go forward with the expansion, aren't they?
I mean, I think so. You saw this with traditional Medicaid. At first, states were very resistant, but ultimately they all embraced it. I think, you know, you get 5, 10 years out of this law. It's no longer Obamacare. It's now health care reform. It becomes very difficult to say we're not going to take any of the federal dollars, I think.
Yeah. Well, and for red state Dems, I mean, they are running on this issue this year, and this is an affirmative positive from the Affordable Care Act. It's a wedge between Democrats and Republicans and something they feel comfortable talking about in this election year.
It's really a Lyndon Johnson surge, I think, this year, that Medicaid's back in the news. The expansion, Democrats are finally kind of pushing for it. Yes, Mary Landrieu, others saying, look, these are working poor Americans, the very people who are supposed to benefit from reform, the very people who need reform because they're disproportionately sick compared to the general population. If you're not going to help them, who are you going to help? It's good politics. It's good policy, I think.
Yeah, great points. I'm going to give you the chance. Do you want to do an impression of Speaker Boehner before I let you go?
Oh, you don't want to see me cry on camera.
Thank you so much for being here. Up next, more politics. What brought Speaker Boehner to tears? We will sort that out next.